Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep into Flutter 3.27 today. We've got release notes and articles ready, but we want to help you figure out, what do these updates actually mean, Whether you're the one building the apps or just using them, this isn't just about listing off changes. It's about seeing where Flutter's going and what that means, for the whole future of making apps.
You know what's interesting to me about this release? They're really focusing on refining things, on the user experience. It's not so much about adding a ton of brand new things. It's about making what's already there even better, more powerful, more enjoyable to use.
Yeah, like Impeller. It's finally the default rendering engine on all the modern Android devices. We talked about this with iOS, but Android is catching up, just in case anyone's not familiar. Impeller is all about tackling those little animation hiccups, what developers call jank, especially the ones caused by, shader compilation?
It's like, have you ever been scrolling through an app and the animation stutters? Or it skips a frame? That's jank.
Yeah.
And it kind of ruins that smooth experience you expect from a good app.
Yeah.
So Impeller uses this thing called Vulkan. And it basically lets Flutter talk to the graphics hardware on your phone way more efficiently.
It's like going from a bike to a sports car.
Yeah, exactly.
In terms of performance, huge for apps with lots of graphics or, complicated animations. But here's the cool part. If a device doesn't have Vulkan, Flutter can just use the old Skia engine, so you get the best of both worlds.
No, their animations are great and all.
Yeah.
But I think it shows how committed they are to making a truly native experience on both of the big platforms. You know that feeling when an app just blends in with the operating system? It's subtle, but it's important. It changes how people feel about the app.
Totally. And speaking of that native feel, the Cupertino widgets, the ones that look like iOS, they got a huge makeover this time around. They really want those widgets to look and act just like the real iOS stuff.
A lot of the changes seem small at first, like the Cupertino checkbox and Cupertino radio buttons look a little different. And the Cupertino sliding segmented control has this new sizing option. It's proportional now. But these are the details that users notice.
Right. It's about the details. Even the segmented control has a different thumb radius now. Who even notices that?
Users might not be able to describe it, but they know when something feels off. And by focusing on all these tiny things, Flutter's making sure the Cupertino widgets feel like they belong on iOS. And that matters to people.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about getting rid of jank with Impeller. And the new Cupertino widgets, what about material design? Did those widgets get any love?
Oh, absolutely. And this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Especially if you're into design systems and theming.
Theming. Oh, good. We get to talk about theming. So for anyone listening who isn't a designer or whatever, theming is how you set a consistent look for your app. The colors, the fonts, the shapes of buttons, all that stuff. And good theming makes your app look really professional.
Exactly. And one of the main things in 3.27 is making theming easier and more consistent. For example, card theme, dialogue theme, and tabber theme. They've all been updated to be more standardized.
So it's not just about making things look pretty. It's about making things easier for developers. Because if you can set your theme once and it just works across all these different components, that saves so much time and effort.
It really does. And it means fewer errors, less inconsistency, which means a better app in the end. But it's not just about making things standard. They added some cool new features, too. Like the segmented button has a new direction property, so you can align it vertically.
Oh, yeah. And there are more ways to customize buttons with icons. It feels like Flutter keeps giving us more control, more flexibility. I love that.
Speaking of powerful, we got to talk about the new layout stuff. Specifically, this thing called carousel view.weighted. It kind of blew my mind when I first saw it.
Wait, hold on. Before we go there, I just love that they're tackling these bigger layout challenges. Carousels are everywhere these days, right?
Right.
But they can be a real pain to get working perfectly.
Oh, for sure. But carousel view.weighted changes everything. It's all about dynamic layouts inside carousels. So you can have items that are different sizes and spacing without having to jump through hoops.
So you're saying I can finally make that multi-browse carousel I always wanted? With the big hero image.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or that centered hero layout, where the main item is in the middle and the others are off to the side. There's so many possibilities. But even for the simpler stuff, they added this spacing parameter to the row and column widgets.
Oh, yeah. That one's not going to make headlines, but it's going to save people so much time. Before, you had to write all this extra code just to add space between elements. Now it's just a parameter.
Exactly. Cleaner code, easier to read, easier to maintain, small changes that make a big difference.
And happy developers make better apps, right? When you're not fighting with the tools, you can be more creative. You can focus on the user experience.
I like that.
It's like Flutter is our sidekick, helping us fight the good fight.
I like that. Speaking of sidekicks, we also got some updates to DevTools. That's the tool we use to debug and profile Flutter apps.
I am excited to hear about this. DevTools has saved my life so many times. What did they add? Tell me everything.
Well, one of the coolest things is this new Flutter inspector. It's still experimental, but it has a completely redesigned interface for visualizing the widget tree.
Wait, widget tree, can you explain that for anyone who's new to Flutter?
Sure. The widget tree is basically a diagram of all the UI elements in your app. It shows how everything is nested and arranged, and the Flutter inspector lets you see that tree. You can see the properties of each widget, and you can even interact with them live.
So it's easier to see what's going on under the hood and find those annoying UI bugs.
Exactly. And it can help you understand how different widgets work together and learn the best ways to build user interfaces.
Awesome. You said there was another big update to DevTools, right? Something about WebAssembly. I don't even know what that is.
So WebAssembly is this new technology. It lets you run code written in other languages like C++ and Rust directly in the web browser. And the cool thing is DevTools itself can now run on WebAssembly.
So what does that mean for developers? Does it make DevTools faster?
It could, yeah. WebAssembly is super fast and efficient, so it can make DevTools more responsive and more fun to use.
Wow. Okay, so smoother animations, a more native iOS look, better theming, powerful layout tools, and a supercharged DevTools. What else can Flutter 3.27 do? Can it make me coffee?
Haha, not yet. But it can make your apps run even better on specific platforms, like iOS and Android. There are some really interesting platform-specific improvements in this release.
Oh, tell me more. What did they do to make our lives easier?
Okay, so let's start with iOS. Flutter is starting to use Swift Package Manager now, or SPM for short.
Swift Package Manager, what's that all about?
It's basically the way you manage dependencies and libraries in Swift projects. And by switching to SPM, Flutter is making it way easier to use in iOS projects and to get access to all the Swift libraries out there.
So Flutter's trying to fit in better with the Swift world.
Exactly.
I like it. What about Android? Any exciting news there?
Definitely. Edge-to-edge mode is now on by default for any device running Android 15 or higher.
Edge-to-edge mode. Remind me what that is again.
Okay, so edge-to-edge mode means your app can fill the entire screen, even the parts under the system bars. It's a much more immersive experience,
Yeah.
especially on phones with those fancy edge-to-edge displays.
Oh, right, like when you watch a video and it takes up the whole screen.
Exactly.
No, black bars.
And Flutter is making it super easy to make those kinds of experiences on Android. Plus, they've improved support for Android Freeform. That's the thing where users can resize their app windows to any size they want.
Oh, yeah, that's so useful. Especially on tablets, you can have multiple apps open at the same time, or resize an app to fit just right.
Right.
It's about giving users control, flexibility.
Exactly. Recognizing that people have different needs and giving them the tools to make things work how they want.
That's a great point. We're moving away from that one-size-fits-all approach to app design, and Flutter is part of that.
Definitely. It's about making apps that feel at home on each platform, while still having the power and efficiency of a cross-platform framework.
This is incredible. I'm so impressed with all the new stuff in Flutter 3.27, and we haven't even covered everything yet.
I know, right?
There's still so much more to talk about.
There is, but I think we've covered the big stuff for this first part.
I agree. I think it's time to take a break, let this all sink in, and then we'll come back for part 2 and dive into even more Flutter goodness.
Sounds good to me. See you in part 2.
See you then.
Welcome back. Ready for more Flutter 3.27 goodness.
No, yeah, part 1 was packed with big stuff like Impeller and Cupertino, but Flutter's all about the details too, right?
Yeah.
But what are some of those smaller but still super important improvements?
Well, one that comes to mind is the new text selection on desktop.
Oh, yeah, I saw that in the notes.
Yeah.
Something about using Shift plus click to extend selections?
Yeah, exactly. Before this update, extending text selections on desktop was a little clunky. But now it works just like you'd expect, like in any other desktop app.
As someone who spends way too much time writing on the computer, I appreciate that. It's the little things, you know.
Right. It's all about making things feel natural and familiar for users, no matter what platform they're on. Speaking of smooth experiences, there's also the improved root transition synchronization.
Okay, I gotta be honest. That one went over my head a little bit. What exactly does that do?
So imagine you're moving between screens in an app, and each screen has its own transition animation.
Like one slides in from the left and another fades in.
Exactly. Before, those transitions could get a little out of sync,
Yeah.
which made things feel not as smooth. But now, with the improved synchronization, it all flows together perfectly.
So it's one of those things you might not notice consciously, but it makes the whole app feel more polished.
Exactly. And while we're talking about small but important stuff, don't forget about the web. There's some great new stuff for web developers in 3.27 too.
Web devs represent. So what did they do for us this time?
One big one is they optimized how images are decoded in Safari and Firefox. They're using web elements now.
Okay, break that down for me. What does optimized image decoding mean in real life?
Basically, images will load faster and more efficiently, which means less jank and a smoother experience for users.
Less jank is always good, and faster loading times are crucial these days. People have zero patience for slow websites, so I'm glad they're keeping the web experience fast and smooth.
It shows that they're committed to making Flutter a true cross-platform framework. They're not just focused on mobile. They're constantly improving the experience on all platforms.
Right, because the web is still a huge part of our lives. It deserves just as much attention as mobile or desktop. So we covered some of the smaller updates. What else is new in 3.27?
Well, we've talked a lot about how Flutter is trying to create more native experiences, and this release takes that even further with some platform-specific improvements.
Oh, I'm listening. Tell me more.
Let's start with iOS. Flutter is moving to Swift Package Manager for installation, SPM.
SPM, right. Remind me, what is that again?
It's how you manage code packages in Swift, like libraries or repositories of code that you can add to your projects.
So this makes it easier to install and use Flutter in iOS projects.
Exactly. It's simpler now, especially for devs who are already using Swift.
So Flutter's trying to be a good neighbor in the Swift world.
Yeah, exactly.
Making things easier. I like that. What about Android? Anything new there?
Oh yeah, definitely. Edge-to-edge mode is now the default on devices running Android 15 or higher.
Edge-to-edge mode again. Just for anyone who missed it, what does that mean again?
It means your app can extend all the way to the edges of the screen, even under the system bars.
So it's that immersive look where the app fills the entire display.
Exactly. And now it's the standard on new Android devices. Flutter's encouraging developers to use this more modern style.
I love it. It's so much nicer. Those apps that don't use the whole screen just feel outdated.
Right, it's like watching a movie with black bars at the top and bottom.
Exactly. So edge-to-edge mode for the win. What else did they do for Android?
They also improved support for Android Freeform, where users can resize their app windows.
Oh yeah, that's so useful. Especially on tablets, you can have multiple apps open next to each other, or resize an app to fit a certain spot on the screen.
Right, giving users more control.
I think that's really important. We're moving away from this idea that every app has to look the same, and Flutter is part of that change.
Totally. It's about making apps that feel right on each platform, but still using the power of a cross-platform framework.
Okay, so in this part, we talked about text selection, route transitions, web performance, and some cool platform-specific stuff.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's even more to explore in Flutter 3.27.
I know. But I think we've given everyone a good taste of what's new.
Definitely. We've seen how Flutter is getting better and better, more powerful, more flexible, easier to use.
And they're doing it all while listening to the community, which is awesome.
So what's next?
Well, I think it's time to talk about the developer experience. We've touched on this with DevTools and Swift Package Manager, but there's more to explore in terms of how Flutter is making development smoother and more enjoyable.
Sounds good to me.
Let's take a quick break and come back for the final part. We're back for the final part of our Flutter 3.27 deep dive. We've talked about performance, UI changes, platform stuff. But now it's time for something every developer cares about, the actual development experience.
It's easy to get excited about new features and shiny things, but having a smooth and enjoyable development process, that's just as important.
Totally. If you're fighting with the framework all the time, it's hard to stay creative. So what's Flutter done in 3.27 to make our lives easier? Maybe even more fun?
We've already talked about some of the big ones, like the new DevTools and switching to Swift Package Manager, but it goes deeper than that.
Oh, tell me more. I'm all ears.
It's more about a whole approach to development, like they're improving the documentation, making error messages more helpful, and giving better support for the stuff developers do every day.
So it's not just adding stuff, it's making the existing stuff better. I like that. We've all been there, right? Staring at an error message that makes no sense, wondering if it's you or the universe is broken.
Oh, for sure. Those moments are the worst. So Flutter's trying to make those error messages more clear, more concise, more helpful,
So instead of feeling like you're decoding some secret message, you actually get some clues on how to fix it.
Exactly. And it's not just error messages. The documentation is getting better too. Easier to find what you need. More examples, more tutorials.
Speaking of tutorials, I've been really impressed with Flutter's learning stuff. The official docs are great, and there's so much amazing content from the community, too.
That's one of the best things about Flutter. The community is amazing. So
Yeah.
supportive, so active. And Flutter is helping that community grow by giving people more ways to connect and share knowledge.
It's like this giant brainstorming session. Everyone's helping each other learn and build cool things.
It's really inspiring. And that spirit of collaboration, it shows in how Flutter is developed. They're always listening to feedback from the community, taking suggestions, incorporating new ideas.
So it's not just Flutter telling developers what to do. It's a two-way street.
Exactly. It's a real partnership.
That's awesome. Okay, so we've covered a lot in this deep dive. We saw how they're pushing performance with Impeller, making apps feel native with Cupertino, giving developers better tools.
And building this amazing community.
What's the big takeaway here? What does all this mean for Flutter's future?
Well, I think it's clear that Flutter is here to stay. It's a mature, powerful framework, and people are using it to build some of the biggest apps out there,
And they're not slowing down. They're still innovating, making things better.
and doing it all while listening to the community.
It's a great time to be a Flutter developer. So if you're listening to this and you're curious about Flutter, go check it out. Explore the docs, play with the code.
Don't be afraid to reach out to the community. There are so many people who want to help you learn.
That's it for our deep dive into Flutter 3.27. We hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy fluttering.